my lovely friends. Thank you for being here. If you're new and you like books, then this channel is dedicated to bookish things and writing. So yeah, subscribe if you're interested, or maybe watch through this video and see if you even like looking at my face, and then subscribe. So today I just wanted to do a fun little kind of update video. I actually finished reading David Copperfield, which it was supposed to take the whole quarter because I was reading this with a class and with my professor, and so we were reading it purposefully pretty slowly, but I started it at the beginning of January and it is now mid-March, which is crazy. It took that long, but it was a really thick book. I've shown you guys this before if you watched my first David Copperfield video. And wow, this was my first time reading Dickens, and I was so impressed with Dickens's style. I didn't think it was going to be so accessible and so enjoyable for me to read. Like a lot of people, I think I always had that expectation that Dickens was going to be kind of impossible and just really over my head, but it's really not. And I think it just goes to show that classics sometimes get a bad rap, especially from earlier eras. I think the Victorian era has such great literature, and I think it is really accessible for anyone. I did find out that a lot of kids in my class actually listened to the audiobook of this while they were reading, and that sort of helped them. And that is something that I have done in the past with books that are kind of harder to get into. I've even done it with like Jane Austen before, just because when I first got into college, I really didn't know what I was doing, and I was like, I want to read this along with an audiobook, and that really helps. So maybe if you're intimidated by the length, you could try that because they have really entertaining voice actors who read them out loud, and so that one is supposed to be really good. But I just read it the old-fashioned way and it was perfectly fine. I really wasn't bored at all. Dickens does this lovely thing where like he sort of makes a caricature out of all of his characters, and they all have sort of like these taglines. Because there are so many different characters, he kind of has to do that, but it makes them seem animated in some odd way. I just think it's a romp. It's really fun. For one of my final projects in my David Copperfield class, I had to make a map of London, of all the different places around London and around southern England where David travels in the novel, and it was really fun just exploring all the different areas that are mentioned in the book. It's really a joy to read, honestly. I can't recommend it to you enough, and I'm so glad that I finally finished it. Honestly, I do feel really accomplished, but I hope that this will help me feel less intimidated about reading big books, and also less intimidated about reading Dickens specifically, because he is wonderful. One thing I really appreciated about this book is that it's made to please the readers. It's made to have a dramatic yet happy and satisfying ending where most of the characters, in some cases, literally sail off into the sunset and live happily ever after. And I think it's kind of charming and sweet, and it speaks to the era that it was written in, but it's really fun. So yay, book update. I read a big book and it was awesome. So for the rest of this video, I kind of just wanted to do a sort of like loose shout out to some of my other favorite classics that I haven't yet talked about on this channel that I wanted to throw out there. So if you're looking for some book recommendations, or if you're just curious, then stay tuned because that's what's coming up. The first one I'd want to talk about, since we're on the Victorian wave already with Dickens, is Persuasion by Jane Austen. And this little tiny book is so much fun. I think Pride and Prejudice and even books like Emma are much more hyped up than Persuasion. Tell me if I'm wrong, tell me if you've read it, but I didn't hear much about it before I read this. I actually did read this for a class last year. It is so short, and so because of that, it's really easy to get into, and it has a lot of Austen's classic stylistic moves that she does, and on the surface, it's just another star-crossed lovers type of love story where there's some obstacles to their relationship relationship, but I think there's a lot more that you can get out of it too. I found that there was some interesting notes of class issues, feminist issues, even Orientalism in some parts of this novel. But it's really funny, it's satirical, and it's actually Austen's final novel, which I didn't know until I was just doing some research. So I thought that was really interesting. Highly recommend it. It's really short and tiny, so if you want to get started with Austen but you don't know where to start, then I think this is a good place. So next up, we have one that I don't hear people talking about much. It's The Moonstone by Wilkie Collins, and this is actually one of the very first detective novels from like the Victorian era, and it predates Sherlock Holmes, which I thought was really interesting because when I was younger I used to love reading Arthur Conan Doyle's stories, and this is kind of in the same vein, arguably just as fun, if not better. Wilkie Collins was actually good friends with Dickens, which I thought is pretty interesting. I also read another book by him, A Woman in White, and that one was also good. I just think there is such an aesthetic to these old Victorian detective novels that is so much fun. I can't recommend it enough. Nobody talks about it. I think it's really underrated. It was hailed by T.S. Eliot as the first, the longest, and the best modern English detective novel. So T.S. Eliot has spoken. Tiny plot summary. There's this Indian stone called the Moonstone. It's supposed to bring bad luck to its owner, and then the Moonstone gets stolen, and the whole mystery sort of revolves around who stole it and why. And so honestly, it's great. Can't recommend it enough. Please go pick it up if you can find it, maybe at a secondhand bookstore or at a library, because it's awesome. Especially if you like detective fiction, which I don't normally, but I do like Victorian detective fiction. Last one I wanted to talk about for this mini classics book recommendations video is The Sound and the Fury by Faulkner, and this one is definitely not underrated, but it's so good. It's very challenging, and so I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to read it with a class, because we really got to parse through it and talk about it. But if you don't, I still recommend giving it a shot, but maybe if you're intimidated by the language, you can do some preliminary research, which just might help ground you in the novel a little bit. I'm sure if you're watching this video, a lot of you have read it. I'm sure it was like a required reading in many classrooms, but I'm curious, yeah, have you read it? In my copy, can I just show you? I did so much like annotating, and it really helped me to parse through what was going on. I also had to write essays on it, and so that helped me as well. We get the story from differing perspectives in the novel. There's different sections where a different main character is speaking, and it's kind of about the fall of this well-off Southern family and their dissolution. It all sort of revolves around Caddy, the one daughter of the family who is beautiful and rebellious, and sort of the way that all the other siblings, the servant, and the parents interact with her and project their fears onto her. And it's a really interesting family dynamic, but also I think what makes this book so special is it's known for this very unconventional narrative style, multiple different narrative styles, but specifically stream of consciousness, which I don't think was very popular at this time, but he really had this tour de force novel and it became super popular, and I think a lot of modern writers were experimenting with it after him. And then also just a non-linear plot line all about the destruction and dissolution of this aristocratic old South family, the Compson family. There's elements of race, class, obviously, social status, and these sort of interesting family dynamics like I was talking about, and female identity. So many interesting themes in the story. My favorite section though is Benji's chapter, because Benji is one of the brothers of Caddy and one of the sons of the family, but he is mentally challenged, or he has a disability. And so Faulkner was really trying to capture the way his thoughts were put down on paper, and it's very segmented and sort of blunt, and there's very little context, but it's a fun challenge to read, and I think super insightful, and it changed the way people thought about how you could write from different characters' perspectives. So obviously this one's talked about a lot. It's a classic, but if you haven't read it, I have to recommend it. Let me know if you guys have read any of these, including David Copperfield, and if you like them, if you don't like them, if you have any other classic novel recommendations. For me, I'd be super interested to hear. So that's all for now. I hope to be back soon with another video. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you later. Bye.